A small, silver stud gleamed innocently on the bathroom counter under the harsh fluorescent light. She never wore studs, said they made her feel plain. I noticed it, but didn't say anything. Maybe it was a gift. Maybe she was trying something new. Still, the sight of it nestled among her usual things gnawed at me, like a puzzle piece that didn't fit. Then came her phone. She used to leave it lying around, on the kitchen counter, the coffee table, even the bathroom sink. Now, it was always with her, like an extension of her hand. At first, I told myself it was nothing. Everyone's glued to their phones these days, right? But it wasn't just that she kept it close. It was how she held it, tight, almost defensive, as though it were a shield against something I might discover. Doubts began as whispers, easy to dismiss. You're imagining things, I told myself. Work's been stressful, and she's probably just overwhelmed too. But doubts are insidious. They creep in, latch on, and grow stronger with every little inconsistency. The late nights started next. Her modeling gig had seemed like a blessing at first, a creative outlet that paid well. How could I not be supportive? But now, she came home at odd hours, offering excuses that felt just a little too smooth. Networking, she'd say, or the photographer insisted on drinks after the shoot. Her words were plausible, but something about the way she said them tugged at the frayed edges of my trust. Then, one night, she came home smelling like cologne. Not her perfume, not mine. Someone else's. My stomach churned as she breezed past me with a distracted kiss on the cheek and a quick, "Sorry I'm late." The scent lingered in the air long after she disappeared down the hall, accusing and undeniable. I wanted to confront her right then, to ask her, "Who were you with? Why do you smell like someone else?" But fear held my tongue. What if I'm wrong? What if it's nothing? Worse, what if it's exactly what I think it is? For days, I wrestled with myself. I tried to bury the suspicions, smother them under the weight of my love for her. But cracks had already formed, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't hold back what was seeping through. The breaking point came late one night when she was in the shower. Her laptop sat on the kitchen counter, screen dark. My pulse quickened as I stared at it. Don't do this, I thought. Once you start, there's no going back. But the need to know, to stop feeling like I was losing my mind, overwhelmed everything else. My hand trembled as I tapped the trackpad, and the screen lit up. What I found wasn't what I expected. An email account I didn't recognize stared back at me. I scrolled through short, business-like exchanges with names I didn't know. Words like rates, availability, and preferences jumped out, each one hitting like a hammer. My breath quickened as I pieced together what I was seeing. The final email made my chest tighten. A client asking for her profile link. Heart pounding, I copied the phrase into a search engine. Seconds later, the screen filled with images. There she was, her face staring back at me from a high-end escort site. The photos were her but not her. Versions of her I'd never seen, dressed in ways I didn't recognize, posed with a confidence I couldn't comprehend. Beneath the pictures, the captions painted a fantasy. Sophistication, exclusivity, unforgettable experiences. I slammed the laptop shut, my mind racing. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe someone was using her photos without her knowledge. But deep down, I already knew. The late nights, the cologne, the guarded phone. It all made sense now. My worst fears weren't just fears. They were facts. And yet, a small voice whispered in the back of my mind. What if there's more? What if this isn't even the whole story? That night, as she slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my chest tight with grief and fury. The woman I thought I knew had been hiding an entire life from me. My love for her, once so steady, now felt like a weight dragging me down into darkness. The next morning, I made a decision. I would get proof, undeniable, irrefutable proof. If she thought she could keep this hidden, she was wrong. But as I planned my next steps, fear gnawed at me. What else will I uncover? And what will it cost me to know the truth? As she left for her shoot that afternoon, her heels clicking on the hardwood, I watched her go. My heart was a battlefield, torn between the desire to believe her and the undeniable need to uncover the lies. This time, when I opened the escort site, I wasn't just looking. I was preparing for war. The morning after I found her profile, I woke to a sense of dread so heavy it felt like it might suffocate me. The bed beside me was empty, a cold void that mirrored the hollowness in my chest. Sunlight streamed through the blinds, too bright, too cruel, as if mocking the chaos in my mind. Images from the night before played in an endless loop. The photos, the prices, the captions promising unforgettable experiences. My stomach twisted, while rising in my throat. Was it all a lie? Every shared moment, every whispered, "I love you." Had any of it been real? By late afternoon, I couldn't take the stillness anymore. I paced the kitchen, my phone a useless weight in my hand. Confront her? What would I even say? Why did you destroy us? Why did you choose this? But what kind of answer could justify it? When I saw her phone charging on the bedside table, my pulse quickened. She had always guarded it like a lifeline, but now it was there, vulnerable. I hesitated, guilt prickling at the edges of my resolve. Once you open this door, there's no going back. But the need to know one. The screen came to life, and to my shock, it was unlocked. At first, the messages seemed ordinary, casual chats, mundane reminders. But then I found it, a thread from a number saved as Sophie. The words jumped out like knives: bookings, standard rate, an extra for the overnight. My heart pounded as I read one that seared itself into my mind. Can you be discreet about the husband this time? He's getting suspicious. I dropped the phone as though it burned me. Anger surged, hot and wild, swallowing the fear and doubt. She wasn't just lying. She was laughing at me, undermining everything I thought I knew about her, about us. But underneath the rage, a cold realization formed. She's meeting someone tonight. The hours crawled by, every second stretching unbearably. I meticulously prepared, printing every screenshot, every damning text. Her appointment was at a high-end hotel downtown. The address glared up at me from the paper like a beacon. By the time I arrived, the city was cloaked in darkness, the hotel's golden lights gleaming against the stormy sky. I parked across the street, my grip on the steering wheel white-knuckled. She arrived minutes later, stepping gracefully out of a cab in a dress I didn't recognize. Her heels clicked with unsettling confidence as she disappeared inside. My heart raced as I followed her, staying far enough behind to avoid notice. The elevator took her to the 12th floor. I hesitated as the doors closed, the weight of what I was about to do pressing down on me like a physical force. Once I knocked on that door, there would be no turning back. When the door finally opened, her face told me everything. Shock, panic. The color drained from her cheeks as she stammered, "What are you doing here?" I stepped inside, my voice ice-cold. "We need to talk." The man in the room, a stranger, froze, his expression flickering between confusion and alarm. She looked between us, words failing her. I raised my phone, the red recording light glowing like a warning. "Don't bother lying," I said, my voice low and unyielding. "I know everything." For the first time in weeks, I felt steady, calm. I held the truth in my hands, and I wasn't about to let it go. The drive home from the hotel was a haze of blurred lights and fragmented thoughts, each sharper than the last. The confrontation had been explosive, a clash of raw emotions and truths that neither of us could fully handle. Her face haunted me, flushed with panic, eyes darting between me and the stranger. She tried to explain, stumbling over her words, offering shallow apologies and half-truths that landed like weak jabs against my rising anger. And the man? He didn't even try. The moment I stepped through the door, he bolted. His face red, his gait unsteady, and guilt dripping off him like sweat. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles white as I replayed her words in my mind. It's not what it looks like. The oldest, most tired cliché, delivered in a tone so insincere it only deepened my fury. Not what it looks like. Then what the hell was it? My chest tightened as the weight of her lies pressed down on me like a stone. Every answer she'd given only unearthed more questions. At home, the silence hit me like a physical force. The hum of the refrigerator felt intrusive, the ticking clock on the wall unbearably loud. I stood in the kitchen for a moment, staring at the printed screenshots and notes strewn across the table. This wasn't just evidence anymore. It was a map of deceit, and I needed to follow it to its bitter end. I sat down, breathing deeply to calm the trembling in my hands, and began piecing together the timeline again. I cross-referenced her supposed modeling gigs with the dates of her messages and the hotel bookings I'd uncovered. Patterns emerged, the kind that tightened the knots in my stomach. The deceit wasn't random. It was deliberate, methodical, a second life carefully constructed to avoid detection. But methodical didn't mean perfect. Around midnight, as exhaustion blurred the edges of my vision, I found something new. Her burner email account, the one that had already given me a glimpse into her hidden world, held another clue, a thread titled Travel Plans. My heart raced as I clicked it open. The blood drained from my face as I scrolled through the exchange. Flight confirmations were attached, tickets to Vegas, a city we'd never visited together. The dates matched a weekend I remembered vividly because I'd spent it in bed, sick with the flu. She told me she was at a local Airbnb for a photo shoot. Another lie, tucked neatly into the cracks of my trust. I kept scrolling. The recipient's reply caught my attention. "I'll have the suite ready. Make sure you wear the dress I like." The words blurred as my vision swam. This wasn't just about money anymore, wasn't just about desperation or bad decisions. This was personal, intimate. The betrayal wasn't just professional. It had seeped into something deeper, something sharper. My chest tightened, and I fought the urge to throw her laptop across the room. Every new piece of evidence felt like a fresh stab wound. This wasn't a job, I thought bitterly. This was a life she built without me. The weight of it all pressed down on me, unrelenting. My breaths came shallow and fast as I stared at the flight confirmations. Images of her smiling on our wedding day, of lazy mornings on the couch, of stolen kisses before work. They flooded my mind, each one twisting the knife deeper. I gritted my teeth, forcing the memories away. Was any of it real? The question echoed in my head, pulling at every corner of my resolve. If she'd been lying to me for months, maybe even years, then what was left to hold on to? What was worth saving? I reached for my phone, my thumb hovering over her contact. The urge to call her, to demand answers, was overwhelming. But what could she say that I hadn't already heard? More apologies? More excuses? My hand shook as I set the phone down, my resolve hardening into something colder, sharper. If she thought she could keep this hidden, she was wrong. I owed her nothing now, not my patience, not my understanding. I would uncover everything, every dirty secret she thought she'd buried. And if this was a game, I'd make damn sure I played it better. I grabbed my notepad and began jotting down a new plan. This time, I wouldn't wait for her to come home. I wouldn't tiptoe around the truth, hoping she'd give it to me. I'd find every transaction, every client, every person who knew her for what she really was while I'd been left in the dark. But as I scribbled furiously, a new thought struck me, icy and unwelcome. Who else knows? This couldn't have been something she managed alone. There had to be others, photographers, accomplices, clients, people who'd seen her real face while I'd been staring at a mask. A cold determination settled in my chest. If there were others, I'd find them too. I wasn't just going to expose her lies. I was going to tear apart the entire web she'd spun. The first hints of dawn crept through the windows as I finished the last notes. My exhaustion had been replaced by a grim sense of purpose. There was no turning back now. And then a sound shattered the quiet. The slam of a car door. My heart leapt, adrenaline surging as I glanced at the clock, too early for her to be home. I moved to the window, careful to stay out of sight, and peered out. A man stood by a sleek black sedan parked across the street. He wasn't moving toward the door, just standing there, staring at the house. His figure was shadowed, his features indistinct, but his posture radiated purpose. My pulse quickened. I stepped back from the window, my breath catching in my throat. Who the hell is he? The tension in the room thickened as I watched him from behind the curtain. Minutes ticked by, each one dragging heavier than the last, before he finally turned, climbed into the car, and drove off. I stayed frozen, my mind racing. Whoever he was, he hadn't just been passing through. He'd been watching. And for the first time since this began, a new kind of fear crept in. I wasn't the only one pulling threads. Someone else was, too. And I wasn't sure if I was prepared for what they might find. The house was eerily silent when I returned, the weight of our earlier confrontation lingering in the air like smoke. I dropped my keys on the counter, their clatter echoing too loudly in the stillness. My mind replayed her reaction on a loop, every word, every tremor in her voice dissected and catalogued. When I had confronted her in that hotel room, she had crumbled. At first, tears streamed down her face as she begged me to let her explain, her voice cracking with desperation. "It's not what you think," she had said, over and over, as though repetition could transform lies into truth. "What is it, then?" I demanded, my tone colder than I thought possible. "Because it sure as hell looks like you've been selling yourself to strangers, while I've been working myself to the bone for us." She'd hesitated, her eyes darting toward the man slinking out of the room like a coward. "It started as modeling, I swear. But the money, we needed it, and what?" I had cut her off. "You just decided that this was the best way to help? To lie to me? To turn me into a fool while you lived this double life?" Her response had been weak, a tangle of justifications and self-pity that only stoked my fury. By the time I left, she wasn't crying anymore. She was angry, defensive. She accused me of being cold, distant, more focused on work than her, as though her betrayal was somehow my fault. Now, standing in our quiet kitchen, I felt that anger threatening to rise again, but beneath it was something worse, doubt. I hated it, but her words had wormed their way into my mind. Had I been too focused on work? Too distant? Had I driven her to this? I slammed my fist on the counter, the sharp pain grounding me. No, this wasn't my fault. She could have come to me, talked to me. She didn't have to choose deception. Needing to do something, anything. I pulled out the screenshots, the messages, and the flight confirmations I'd uncovered. My eyes scanned the details, searching for patterns, for something I'd missed. That's when I noticed it. One of the email threads mentioned not just Vegas but another city, one that didn't fit the timeline of her shoots. The destination was marked for a week. She'd claimed to be visiting her sister. My stomach twisted as I pulled up her sister's contact and sent a quick text. "Hey, random question. When Mary stayed with you in June, how long was it again?" The reply came almost instantly. "She wasn't here in June." "Why?" I stared at the screen, my heart thudding painfully in my chest. She hadn't even bothered to tell her sister to cover for her. But it wasn't just the lie that got to me. It was the location of the trip. I dug deeper, finding another email confirming her reservation at an upscale spa and resort. A gut feeling told me this wasn't just another client meeting. Something about this trip felt different, personal. I searched for the resort online, hoping to find more. That's when I stumbled across a social media tag from that same week. A blurry photo, taken in the hotel lobby, showed her in the background, laughing with another man. He wasn't just anyone. It was the same man I'd seen standing outside my house earlier that day. My blood ran cold. Questions flooded my mind, each one more troubling than the last. Who was this man? Was he just another client, or was he something more? And why had he been watching my house? I stared at the photo, at her smile, carefree and radiant, as though she didn't have a care in the world. It was a version of her I hadn't seen in years. The realization hit me like a freight train. This wasn't just about money. There was something deeper here, something she hadn't admitted even under pressure. If I was going to uncover the truth, I needed to go further. I couldn't rely on her to come clean, not when she'd spent so much effort keeping this hidden. Grabbing my phone, I searched for a private investigator. If she was willing to put this much effort into deceiving me, then I would go further. I would uncover every lie, every hidden connection, and every player in her twisted game. I dialed the number, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "I need someone discreet," I said, "and fast." As I hung up, I glanced out the window, half expecting to see the black sedan again. It wasn't there, but the unease remained, gnawing at the edges of my resolve. I looked back at the photo of her and the man at the resort, my jaw tightening. Whoever he is, I'll find out. And when I do, this whole thing will come crashing down. The house had never felt so empty. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the same spot on the floor where her heels used to rest every night. That stupid, insignificant detail haunted me now, a glaring reminder of how easily routines can become lies. The air felt heavier, like it was pressing down on me, and the silence was suffocating. I thought I had a handle on my emotions, anger, betrayal, even disgust. But tonight, something else bubbled to the surface. Sadness. Not the hot, choking tears of anger, but the deep, bone-aching sadness of loss. The woman I'd married, the one who used to laugh with me over burnt pancakes on Saturday mornings, who'd once danced barefoot with me in the kitchen to a terrible pop song, felt like a stranger. I couldn't reconcile her with the woman I'd seen in that escort profile, or the one laughing with another man at a resort while I sat at home, oblivious. Had she ever loved me? Or had I been blind, clinging to a fantasy while she lived another life? My chest tightened as the thoughts swirled, and for a moment, I felt like I couldn't breathe. The sound of a notification on my phone snapped me out of my thoughts. I grabbed it instinctively, expecting another message from the investigator I'd hired. But it wasn't him. It was her. The message was simple. "Can we talk? Please." I stared at it, my pulse quickening. She hadn't tried to contact me since the confrontation at the hotel. Not a single word. Now, after days of silence, she wanted to talk? Anger surged first, burning through the sadness like dry kindling. But as I reread the text, something else crept in, curiosity. What could she possibly say now? What justification could she offer that might make any of this make sense? I typed a response before I could think better of it. "I'll listen, but only if you tell the truth." The reply came almost immediately. "I will. Just let me come home." When she walked through the door an hour later, the tension was palpable. She looked different, less composed, almost haggard. Her makeup was smudged, and her eyes were red, as though she'd been crying. For a fleeting second, I felt a pang of pity, but I quickly buried it beneath the weight of what I knew. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, her hands fidgeting with the edge of her sleeve. "I'm not going to make excuses," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know I've destroyed your trust, and I know I might not be able to fix this, but—" "Stop," I interrupted, my tone sharper than I intended. "Don't start with apologies unless they're real. If you're not going to tell me everything, you can leave right now." She flinched but nodded. "I'll tell you. I swear." The words spilled out of her in a rush, like water breaking through a dam. She admitted to taking the modeling job out of desperation, but she claimed it spiraled into something darker, something she couldn't control. The escorting, the lies, even the trips. All of it was laid bare. She said the man at the resort was a client who got too close, someone who offered her a way out of the escorting life but wanted something in return. I wanted to believe her, but I couldn't shake the nagging doubt in my mind. Her story filled in some gaps, but it didn't explain everything. Not the messages I'd found, not the man watching our house. "So, that's it?" I asked, leaning back in my chair. "You expect me to believe you had no other choice? That this wasn't something you willingly chose, over and over again?" Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "I made terrible choices. I know that. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know that I didn't stop loving you. Not for a second." The words hit me harder than I expected. Part of me wanted to scream at her, to tell her that love didn't excuse betrayal. But another part, the part that still remembered the woman I married, felt an ache I couldn't ignore. I stood abruptly, pacing the room as my emotions churned. I didn't trust her, not fully, but I couldn't deny that something about her confession felt real. Finally, I stopped and turned to her. "You say you want to fix this, but I don't think you understand how deep this cuts. If there's more you're hiding, I'll find out. And if you lie to me again, I swear this is over for good." She nodded, her tears spilling over. "There's nothing else. I swear." For the first time in days, I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the faintest glimmer of something else. Resolve. I wasn't done uncovering the truth, but I needed to play this carefully. If she was lying, I would find out. And if she wasn't, maybe there was a chance to salvage the pieces of what we'd had. As I watched her sitting there, vulnerable and broken, I couldn't help but wonder, was this the beginning of the end, or something else entirely? The next morning, I woke up with the resolve that had been simmering since her confession the night before. If there was one thing I knew, it was that her words weren't enough. Trust wasn't rebuilt on promises, it was earned through proof. I wouldn't sit idly by while she controlled the narrative. When she came into the kitchen, dressed in an oversized sweatshirt and leggings, she looked worn down, almost fragile. But I wasn't in the mood for pity. "We need to talk," I said, my voice clipped. She hesitated by the counter, her hand hovering over the coffee pot. "I thought we talked last night." "Not everything." I pulled the printed emails and screenshots from the pile I'd kept hidden, spreading them across the table like cards in a losing hand. "You say there's nothing else, but this is plenty. So let's start with these." Her face paled as her eyes darted over the papers. She swallowed hard but said nothing. "Vegas," I said, pointing to the flight confirmation. "The man at the resort. What's the real story there? Don't feed me another sob story. I want names. I want details." "I told you," she whispered. "He was just a client, someone I regretted getting involved with." I slammed my hand down on the table, startling her. "A client who stood outside our house yesterday? Who's in photos with you at a resort where you lied about being with your sister? You expect me to buy that?" Her lips parted, but no words came out. The tension between us was electric, crackling with unspoken truths. "Start talking," I demanded, my voice icy. Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time, there was no pleading. She straightened slightly, her hands gripping the back of a chair. "Fine. You want the truth? The whole truth?" "That's the idea. His name is Jason," she began, her voice flat. "He was more than just a client. He wanted more. He said he could get me out of the escorting business, but it came with strings attached. I was stupid enough to think he meant it." The admission hit like a punch to the gut, but it didn't stop there. "He's not just some guy," she continued, her words tumbling out now. "He has connections. He owns the agency where I started. When I tried to leave, he threatened me." I froze. "Threatened you? How?" Her voice dropped, trembling now. "He said he'd tell you everything, ruin my life. He said he'd hurt you if I didn't keep quiet." The room seemed to tilt. I hadn't expected this, another layer to her deception, one that didn't just implicate her but pulled me into the crosshairs. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" I asked, the anger in my voice mingling with disbelief. "I didn't know how," she said. "I didn't think you'd believe me." For a moment, I didn't respond. I could see the fear in her eyes, real, raw fear, but I couldn't tell if it was for herself or for me. I stood abruptly, pacing the room as her words swirled in my mind. "If he's as dangerous as you say, why the hell is he hanging around our house?" "I don't know," she said, her voice cracking. "I haven't seen him since the resort. I thought he'd moved on." Her explanation wasn't enough. My instincts told me there was more to this, something she wasn't saying. I turned to her, my tone hardening. "Give me his full name, the agency name, everything you've got. No more half-truths." She hesitated, but finally nodded, scribbling down the information on a scrap of paper. "Jason Holt, Lux Connections." I snatched the paper and grabbed my keys. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Taking this to someone who can do something about it," I said. "I'm done playing games. If this guy is as connected as you say, then he's not just your problem anymore. He's mine." She started to protest, but I held up a hand. "Stay here. Don't lie to me again, and don't try to fix this yourself. I'll handle it." As I walked out the door, a strange calm settled over me. For the first time, I felt like I was in control, not of her choices, but of my own. In my car, I dialed the investigator's number. "I've got a name for you," I said as soon as he picked up, "and I need everything you can find on him." I glanced back at the house, my stomach knotting as I thought about the man who'd been watching us. If Jason Holt thought he could keep me in the dark, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. Sitting in my car outside the private investigator's office, I stared at the scrap of paper in my hand with Jason Holt's name scrawled across it. My grip tightened as a flood of emotions surged through me: anger, fear, betrayal. For days, I'd been reacting, absorbing the hits as they came. But this was the moment I realized I couldn't live in survival mode any longer. I wasn't just angry at her lies anymore. I was furious at the power this man had over her. And now, over me. If she was telling the truth, Jason Holt had tangled us both in his web, making me a pawn in a game I hadn't even known I was playing. I couldn't sit back and wait for him to strike again. I had to take the fight to him. The investigator's office was a dimly lit room tucked above a dry cleaner, the faint scent of chemicals lingering in the air. Greg, a wiry man with a sharp gaze, motioned for me to sit as I explained everything. Jason's name, the escort agency, the texts, and the man outside my house. He listened intently, jotting down notes with a precision that gave me some comfort. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing. "This guy sounds like bad news," Greg said. "If he's running an agency like that and threatening people, he's not someone who'll back down easy. But everyone has skeletons. We'll find his." "Good," I said, my voice firm. "I don't care how deep you have to dig. I want everything on him. His business, his clients, his weak spots. If he's a threat to her, or me, I need to know." Greg nodded. "It'll take time, but I'll get you what you need. In the meantime, watch your back. Guys like him don't play fair." As I left, a sense of resolve settled over me. For the first time, I felt like I was doing something tangible. Greg would get the dirt on Jason, and I'd finally have leverage, something to tip the scales back in my favor. On the drive home, my mind raced with possibilities. What would Greg uncover? A network of powerful clients? Illegal operations? Something more sinister? Whatever it was, I was determined to use it to cut Jason out of our lives for good. But as I pulled into the driveway, my stomach twisted at the sight of her standing on the porch, pacing nervously. She spotted my car and ran down the steps before I'd even opened the door. "Where were you?" she asked, her voice tight with panic. "Getting answers," I said, brushing past her. She followed me into the house, her tone rising. "What answers? You think you can just handle this on your own? You don't know what he's capable of." I whirled around, my anger surging. "And whose fault is that? You brought him into our lives. You lied to me, hid things from me, and now I'm supposed to just sit here while he watches our house and threatens us?" Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she might break down completely. But instead, she straightened, her expression hardening. "You don't understand," she said. "This isn't just about him. It never was. You think Jason is dangerous? He's nothing compared to the people behind him." "What people?" I demanded, my voice sharp. She hesitated, her eyes darting toward the windows as if expecting someone to be watching. Finally, she whispered, "Jason works for others. His agency caters to powerful men. Politicians, CEOs, people who'll do anything to keep their secrets safe. If you push too hard, they won't just come after you. They'll destroy everything." Her words landed like a punch to the gut. I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "I tried," she said, her voice cracking. "So many times. But you already hated me for what I did, and I thought—" She stopped, biting her lip as tears welled in her eyes. "I thought if I told you the whole truth, it would only make things worse. That you'd never look at me the same way again. And maybe I deserve that, but I couldn't. I couldn't risk losing you completely." For a moment, her vulnerability struck something inside me. But then I remembered the man outside, the lies, the weight of everything I'd uncovered. "You already lost me when you started lying," I said, my tone colder than I intended. The silence between us was heavy, the air charged with unspoken fears. Finally, she nodded, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "Just be careful," she said quietly. As she walked away, I pulled out my phone and called Greg. "We've got a bigger problem than I thought," I said. "These people aren't just clients. They're powerful, and they won't go down easy. Dig faster." He paused, then replied, "Understood." I ended the call, staring out the window at the darkening sky. The storm clouds gathering outside mirrored the tension inside me. I knew I was stepping into dangerous territory, but I didn't care. Jason Holt, and his network thought they were untouchable. They were about to find out just how wrong they were. The moment I got the call from Greg, I knew I was about to step deeper into a storm. His voice had been clipped, urgent. "I've got something you need to see. Jason Holt's not just running an escort service. He's connected to a bigger operation. Money laundering, blackmail, the works." I gripped the phone tighter. "What do you mean, blackmail?" "It's how he keeps control. He collects dirt on everyone he works with, clients, employees. If your wife's tied to him, he's got something on her. Maybe even on you." The thought sent a chill down my spine. Blackmail? I hadn't considered that angle, but now it all made sense. Jason's hold on her wasn't just about threats. It was about leverage. And if he had something on her, on us, I needed to know what it was. After hanging up, I sat in my car outside the house, staring at the front door. She was inside, probably pacing again, probably wondering what I was planning. Part of me wanted to demand answers from her directly, but I couldn't trust what she'd tell me. Not anymore. If I was going to get the truth, I'd have to go straight to the source. It was a dangerous move, but I was done being cautious. That evening, I found myself outside Jason's office, a sleek, glass-walled building tucked in the heart of downtown, the kind of place that looked more like a law firm than a den of illegal activity. My fists clenched as I stood in the shadows, watching as suited men and impeccably dressed women came and went. I didn't have an appointment, but I didn't need one. I waited until one of the guards stepped away from the main door for a smoke break, then slipped inside with a group of clients. The elevator ride up to the top floor felt like forever, the hum of the machinery barely masking the pounding of my heart. When the doors opened, I stepped into a room that reeked of wealth and power. A man behind a glass desk looked up, his sharp features and confident smirk telling me exactly who he was. "Jason Holt. Can I help you?" he asked, his voice smooth but laced with suspicion. I walked straight to his desk, my fists clenched at my sides. "We need to talk." He leaned back, his smirk widening. "I don't believe we've met. You must be a friend of one of my clients." "You know who I am," I said coldly. "You've been watching my house, threatening my wife. Don't bother playing dumb." For a moment, his expression didn't waver. Then, a flicker of recognition crossed his face. "Ah, you must be the husband." He laughed lightly, shaking his head. "I have to say, you're more proactive than most." His dismissive tone fanned the flames of my anger. "Cut the crap, Jason. I know you're holding something over her. Something you think will keep us in line. Whatever it is, it ends now." He stood, his confidence never faltering, and walked to a cabinet by the wall. "You think you can just walk in here and demand things? That's adorable. You've got guts, I'll give you that." I took a step closer, my voice low and steady. "If you've got something on her, I'll find it. And when I do, I'll make sure you lose everything." Jason turned, holding a sleek tablet in his hands. "You're in over your head, my friend. Your wife is in deeper than you know. And if you keep pushing, I won't just destroy her. I'll destroy you too." He tapped the screen, and an image appeared. My stomach lurched. It was a photo of her, sitting at a bar with a man who wasn't Jason. Her face was pale, her expression tense, and the man's hand was gripping her arm. "She's not just my problem," Jason said. "She's made deals with people you don't want to cross. People who'd be very unhappy if I lose control of this situation." The weight of his words hit me like a punch to the gut. Who was this man in the photo? Another client? Another threat? But beneath the shock, a fire ignited. Jason wanted me to back down, to be scared, but all he'd done was give me more reason to dig deeper. I met his gaze, my voice steady. "You don't scare me. Whatever she's gotten into, I'll deal with it. But you? You're done." Jason's smirk faltered for the first time. "You're making a mistake." "No," I said, turning toward the door. "You are." As I left, my mind raced. The photo was a new piece of the puzzle, and I needed to know who that man was and what hold he had over her. Back in my car, I dialed Greg's number. "I've got a photo for you," I said. "Find out everything about the man in it." As the line went silent, I glanced back at Jason's office, the glass windows reflecting the city lights. I didn't know how far this rabbit hole went, but I wasn't stopping now. Whatever it took, I would bring it all crashing down. The morning was quiet, too quiet. Sunlight spilled through the window of the now empty guest room, illuminating the papers strewn across the desk, flight itineraries, photos, emails, and a single sheet of notes scribbled in my handwriting. All the evidence I had collected told a story, but not just hers. It told mine. Each lie, each betrayal, had chipped away at the man I used to be. I'd spent so much energy fighting to uncover the truth that I hadn't stopped to ask myself a simple question. Why? Did I want to save this marriage? Did I even want to save her? Or was I just too afraid to let go? I stared out the window at the quiet street, the stillness outside in stark contrast to the chaos inside me. I had loved her deeply, completely, and it wasn't just her betrayal that hurt. It was the loss of the life I thought we had. But as I stood there, I realized something. The man who had walked into that hotel room, who had confronted Jason Holt, who had pieced together the web of lies, wasn't the same man who had ignored the warning signs for so long. I wasn't her victim anymore. When she came into the living room later that day, I could tell she sensed the change. She was guarded, unsure of how to approach me. "Have you found out anything else?" she asked softly. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I motioned for her to sit. She hesitated, then perched on the edge of the couch, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "I know everything I need to know," I said finally. My voice was calm, measured, but it carried a weight that made her flinch. "Then you know I'm sorry," she said, her voice cracking. "I was wrong. I should have told you everything sooner. I should have trusted you." I shook my head. "You don't get it. This isn't about what you should have done. It's about what I need to do now." Her eyes widened, panic creeping in. "Please don't do this," she whispered. "We can fix this. We can." "No, we can't." My words cut through her plea like a knife. "You made choices that I can't forgive. Choices that destroyed the foundation of everything we had. And maybe I made mistakes too. Maybe I wasn't there in the ways you needed me to be. But that doesn't excuse what you did." Tears filled her eyes, and for a moment, I almost faltered. But then I thought about Jason's threats, the lies she had fed me for months, and the man in the photo whose name I still didn't know. This wasn't love anymore. It was survival. "I'm filing for divorce," I said, the words steady, final. "And I want you out of this house by the end of the week." Her face crumpled, and she began to sob, but I didn't move to comfort her. I couldn't. "I'll give you the support you need to get away from Jason and his people if you really want it," I added. "But you and we're done." The door closed behind her an hour later, leaving the house in silence. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at the space she had occupied, the echo of her presence still lingering. I felt a pang of sadness, but it was different now, cleaner. Not the suffocating weight of betrayal, but the bittersweet ache of release. I walked to the desk, gathered the papers, and shoved them into a drawer. Then I picked up my phone and called Greg. "You don't need to dig any further," I told him. "I've made my decision." "You sure about that?" he asked. I looked out the window again, the sunlight catching on the leaves outside. For the first time in weeks, the world didn't feel like it was closing in on me. "I'm sure," I said. After hanging up, I grabbed my keys and left the house. I didn't know exactly where I was going, but I knew what I needed: a clean slate, a chance to build something new, not on lies and betrayal, but on truth and self-respect. As I drove, the weight I'd been carrying for so long began to lift, replaced by a sense of quiet determination. There would be challenges ahead, and the scars of what I'd been through wouldn't fade overnight. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what came next. As the car rolled to a stop at a red light, I glanced in the rearview mirror, meeting my own gaze. I didn't see the man who had been broken by betrayal anymore. I saw someone stronger, someone ready to face whatever came next. The light turned green, and I pressed the gas pedal. It was time to move forward. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine and fresh dew as I stood on the trail overlooking the valley. The house I'd shared with her was miles behind me now, sold to a family who seemed excited to fill it with laughter and love. I'd packed my things and moved into a small, quiet apartment, just enough space for me and the pieces of myself I still had to rebuild. Up here, on this ridge, I could finally breathe. The betrayal, the lies, even the rage, they no longer consumed me. They were part of me, yes, etched into the fabric of my story, but they didn't define me anymore. I was different now, stronger, sharper, more cautious, but also more alive. The scars of what I'd been through hadn't faded, but they no longer felt like weights dragging me down. Instead, they felt like markers, reminders of where I'd been, of what I'd survived, of who I'd become. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the last physical reminder of her I'd kept, a photo from years ago. It was us on a beach, her head resting on my shoulder, both of us laughing at something I couldn't even remember now. For a long time, I couldn't bring myself to let it go. Even after everything, it felt like throwing away a piece of myself. But today, it didn't hurt to look at it. I knelt by the edge of the trail, placing the photo gently between the rocks. The wind picked up, rustling the trees and carrying away the faint smell of salt from the sea in the picture. "Goodbye," I murmured, my voice steady. It wasn't just goodbye to her. It was goodbye to the man I'd been. The man who ignored the warning signs, who trusted blindly, who gave everything to someone who didn't deserve it. Standing, I looked out over the valley, the sunlight breaking through the clouds and illuminating the trees below. The world felt bigger now, full of possibilities I hadn't considered while I was trapped in the shadow of betrayal. As I turned to head back down the trail, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Greg. I hesitated for a moment before answering. "I've wrapped everything up on my end," he said. "Looks like Jason Holt won't be bothering you, or anyone else, for a long time. The authorities have everything they need." I smiled faintly. "Thanks, Greg, for everything. You take care of yourself," he said, and I could hear the warmth in his voice. "You've earned it." As the call ended, I slipped the phone back into my pocket and continued down the trail. I didn't have a detailed plan for the future, but for the first time in a long time, that didn't scare me. I was done looking backward, done trying to make sense of the chaos she'd left behind. Life wasn't about trying to piece together what was lost. It was about building something new, something better. I'd started taking night classes a few weeks ago. Writing, of all things. It had always been a quiet dream of mine, something I'd put off in the name of practicality. Now, it felt like a way forward, a way to take everything I'd been through and turn it into something meaningful. The sun climbed higher as I reached the base of the trail, its warmth washing over me. I felt lighter than I had in months, the weight of my past finally falling away like leaves in autumn. I didn't know where the road ahead would lead, but I knew one thing for sure. I was ready. As I walked back to my car, I looked up at the endless blue sky and smiled. The best part of my story was still waiting to be written.